Hello, you're watching World Talks live from Warsaw on TVP World. My name is Sasha Farbach. Thousands of people have reportedly been killed in Iran over the past few weeks during a violent crackdown on nationwide protests. This unrest marks the most serious challenge to the clerical establishment since the 1979 revolution, which was the moment the Islamic regime took power. Now, U.S. President Donald Trump on Tuesday publicly expressed support for the protesters and warned the Iranian regime that those responsible for the killings will, quote, pay a big price. Against this backdrop and to discuss the latest, we're now joined by Scott Lucas, Professor of American Studies at University College Dublin. Good to have you back on TVP World.
Thank you so much for having me here, Sasha.
Now, with the latest here, we have varying figures. We're not quite sure which we can verify. I mean, several rights groups have listed anywhere from 2,400, some even higher than that. Tell us a bit about where the reality is. What's the scale? How terrible could really be the loss of life in the past few weeks there in Iran?
Right. The Human Rights Activist News Agency, which is a U.S.-based group, and I think are probably reliable in terms of the information they can get out of Iran, have confirmed the deaths of 2,571 people as of the start of today. About 2,450 of them are protesters. There are also more than 100 government-affiliated personnel. Most of those are security forces, but there's also a prosecutor who has been killed. There are 9 children under the age of 18 who have been confirmed to have been killed. There are reports that are circulating, you'll probably know them, of 12,000, 20,000 people. Those have been generated by a Saudi-backed channel whose information I would always cross-check before circulating it. I would say that that total of 2,571, remembering that it is the verified deaths, there are far more people who will have been killed, whose deaths we cannot confirm. So we are talking in several thousands, I think at least, who have perished in the past 18 days.
Mm-hmm. Also, with all that, this has been ratcheted up. I want to get your, last time we spoke also, already Donald Trump, the U.S. president, saying very much now publicly in the last few hours that he supports the protesters, calling on the Iranian people to take their regime, that help is on the way. How much of an impact do you think those words are? I know there's an internet blackout already in 5 days, but some of this information must be trickling in. What, if anything, this impact may have? His rhetoric, is it risky? Is it dangerous? What kind of impact will the words of the president have on all this?
Well, I mean, first of all, in practical terms at this point, I think Trump just simply blusters. Now, there is a question of, how the U.S. will intervene, whether it be through military action, which I think would be irresponsible and would undermine the protest, or whether it would be through more practical steps, such as trying to open up communications inside the country. That said, and I'm speaking, in terms of friends and contacts I have inside the country, what I can get out from them, despite the internet blackout, is that people are going to be split on this inside Iran. There are some people inside Iran who are so desperate to get rid of the regime that they might even countenance the United States intervening, including with military action, to try to topple the Islamic Republic. But I think there are far more Iranians who realize that if Trump did this, if he actually attacked military facilities, if he attacked the politicians of the Islamic Republic, if he attacked key infrastructure, this would put a target on the back of the protest, because the regime's lying. And this has been ever since the protest in the late 1990s, and especially after 2009, which I think was the critical moment. The regime always says, the protesters you are manipulated by, or you're actually working with the US and Israel. And of course, if the United States was to intervene with military action, the regime would say, hey, look, we told you so. In other words, they delegitimize the protest by pointing to the United States. And I think Trump would be playing into their hands if his action was too aggressive.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there are various sources. We're not quite 100% sure. I mean, there needs to be more military assets on the U.S. side. We haven't seen that as of yet, but we're still getting all that information at the moment. But I want to ask directly, what does President Trump gain from this? Why, if he does go in, if he doesn't go in, what would he gain out of this? I'm looking at the bigger also geopolitical context. I mean, Iran ultimately is a very close aligned nation to Russia. Is that anywhere involved in here?
No, I think it's always personal with Trump. And I think here's the calculation that could play in here. And it's like, remembering he calls himself the president of the peace, he's thinking, all right, if we put pressure on Iran and the regime leaders fall, I look like I've done something really important. If, on the other hand, the regime says, we'll talk to you, and there has been chatter that the Iranian leadership wants to reopen negotiations with the US on issues such as the nuclear program, then Trump can say, look, they're coming to me. They recognize how important I am. They're talking to me. But I think also don't rule out the fact that for Trump, it's just as simple as the fact that Iran has a lot of oil. And coming only a few weeks after the administration has launched operations, including the kidnapping of Venezuela's president, to try to seize that country's oil, Trump could have the same idea that he can do the same thing with Iran.
I mean, he's warned the regime that he would make them pay a big price if they do go ahead with any more killings or potential executions, even on Wednesday. We'll have to see. But on that basis as well, I mean, we're looking at some of the limited information we're getting. We're still with that internet blackdown, some of the information coming through images. We're hearing many, many deaths. But it seems to be that the regime is still very much in charge. You were also in Iran. Tell us a bit about your experience. Is this any different? Do we see, let's say, more cracks now in the system than before, or will this just be all pushed down again?
Yeah, let me just say as an opening statement that we're at a key point here. And we saw this after the 2009 mass protest, when millions went on the streets over an election that was disputed, possibly rigged by the regime. We saw it in 2019 when there were economic protests. 2022, after the Women Life Freedom protest, the regime comes in hard. It kills people, it detains people, and it tries to mobilize its supporters on the street, which it did on Monday. And they did come out in the cities, and it tries to say, oh, look, these protests really are much smaller than the Iranians who love us. In the past, they have succeeded, not because I think most Iranians love them, but they have been able to suppress the protests through the threat of violence and through detentions. That's what they're trying again here. Will it work? I don't know. My own experience here is that on 4 occasions, I tried to visit Iran before 2009 to develop links, academic links, links with activists, links with NGOs. Twice I was able to get inside the country. Twice I was denied because I had a US passport at that time. When I did get into the country, and again, this is speaking to students, speaking to academics, speaking to clerics, speaking to members of NGOs, quite often quietly, away from the public spotlight. What I would tell you here is that most Iranians, especially younger Iranians, would talk about the gradual revolution. They would say that the 1979 Islamic Revolution had not fulfilled its promise, had not done so economically, politically, and socially, but that they believed that they could reform the system. They could fulfill the promise of an Iran that respected their space and continued to advance while being a country which was Islamic-led. 2009 shook that belief, because when those millions of people came out and said, look, we voted for this man, Mir Hossein Mousavi, who we think won the election, the crackdown began. And Mir Hossein Mousavi, by the way, is still under house arrest 15 years after he was effectively detained by the regime. Here we are in 2026. And I think that even if the regime survives this, their legitimacy is eroding. Iranians, my friends, my contacts, even some who don't like me, call it fire under the ashes. And that is, even if you suppress what we want now, our desires don't go away. Don't forget that we still will maintain the challenge to this regime.
Mm-hmm. And I think also that's one of those questions as well, Scott, is if we look at if anything changes there to a point where the regime does go, what does come next? I mean, we're seeing a lot of Reza Pahlavi, for instance, someone who's been living in the United States, the son of the former Shah. At the same time, some people may not like to follow him. I'm just curious what you make of, let's say, opposition figures. We're hearing on Axios reporting that apparently Pahlavi met Steve Witkoff. I mean, what does that indicate to us, if anything? Where is this opposition going, and who would potentially be there to take over if things do change?
One of the challenges for the waves of protest since 2009 has been that the opposition really doesn't have an organized leadership, because most of their leaders have been detained. Some of their leaders have been killed, and some of them have been in prison now for 17 years. And so when people come out on the streets for these demands, these justifiable demands, how do you take it forward in a plan of action to try to either, take out the regime or to try to, as it were, negotiate with the regime to get reforms in place? Now, the problem with just simply saying that Pahlavi can come in and parachute himself in to lead the opposition, and this is pushed by a lot of people in the Iranian diaspora, and I understand why they're doing it, and it's promoted by figures in the US government, is that many people in Iran don't actually want to see the son of the Shah come back, at least with the prospect of a restored monarchy. Because many people would say, we oppose this current regime, but we understand what happened in 1979. We understand why there was an Islamic revolution, because of what the Shah had done to the country. The history of just parachuting someone in from outside to lead a country does not go well. 2003 in Iraq. So I think the fundamental here is this has to come from within Iran. And the one thing I would like to see countries do, and this doesn't, not just the US, I mean European countries, I mean countries in the Gulf, countries in the rest of the Middle East, countries in Asia, is to call for the release of Iran's political prisoners. Because many of those political prisoners do have experience of leadership. They do have experience of the social, economic, political issues that we're talking about. And I think that would boost, as it were, the nature of an opposition, not to necessarily overthrow the regime, but to begin to maneuver with it. That call for political prisoners, I think, would probably be number one on my list right now in terms of what can be done constructively by governments such as Poland's.
All right. Just briefly, towards the end, final question. Speaking also about the Europeans, they've been summoning their Iranian ambassadors on Tuesday. Even the German chancellor on his trip to India said very harshly, and maybe surprisingly, that he says these are the last few days or weeks of the Iranian regime. What do you think of Europe's role in all this? Are they going to now be harsher as well? Where do you see their role?
Yeah, I mean, you can see from the European Union that they're taking the steps that they can take, which is, for example, the restrictions on diplomats. The, Iranian diplomats effectively shutting out of EU premises. Ireland here is not going to recognize the new Iranian ambassador while this goes on. But I think we have to recognize these are steps on the periphery because, what can Europe do inside Iran? We have to recognize that as limited. I mentioned that call to release political prisoners. I also think the EU can take steps to try to open up communications. But I think the fundamental for Europe is you just don't lose sight of the issue. What has happened after 2009, 2019, 2022 is we get this surge of interest in what's happening inside Iran. People risk their lives going out into the streets. I've got friends who have been imprisoned. I've got friends who have been killed. And once the regime succeeds in suppressing the protests for the moment where they aren't so visible, everybody sort of walks away. Well, you don't do that. You don't walk away from an issue of human rights that is ongoing, even if there aren't mass protests on the streets. So I'd simply say, pay attention, keep yourselves informed, and without calling for all-out confrontation, without calling for a breakdown of the country, call for an opening up of that political, economic, and social space for all Iranians.
All right, and the world indeed is watching at the moment and paying attention. Look, thanks so much for all those insights. As ever, always a pleasure. Professor Scott Lucas, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. That concludes World Talks, but stay right here on TVP World for more news and commentary. Goodbye.